Hyett, you want to say something?
Yeah. So I'm just going to introduce these guys. So PJ, founder, lead developer at Github, and Scott. We're obviously huge advocates of open source and as Sparc and the community as a whole. We try to team with cutting edge technology guys like Github to go after multiple industries, whether that's commercial product development or government work. And they were gracious enough to fly out here and hang out with us for a couple days, do some partnerships and some technology Q&A, learn much and learns, etc. So please give me a warm welcome and introduce these guys.
So thank you, Eric, for that introduction. It's fun to be here to learn about how software companies act in the real world. We live in a very strange place in San Francisco where the norm is raising tens of millions of dollars to build Facebook and Foursquare integration. And I absolutely love San Francisco, but it is a very strange bubble that we operate in. And we like to think of GitHub as a normal company that do not normal in the sense that we're not doing all sorts of very cool, innovative stuff, but normally we make money and then we hire more people and then they make better products and then we make more money and we hire more people. You know, fundamentals of running a business, that sort of thing. So I was going to talk a little bit about how GitHub got started, and then Scott was going to talk about more specifically what we do and all sorts of fun stuff like that. I need to move this up a little bit. All right. The way GitHub got started, we were three guys about 4 years ago, and always kind of had the dream of I love that the K is my backdrop. We always had the bug to start our own business. We had been working for corporations, we had been doing some consulting, but the dream of running our own business was always there. And in order to tell the GitHub story, I first have to tell a shorter story about another company that Chris Wanstroth, one of the other co-founders of GitHub, and I tried starting prior to the GitHub. Actually, they sort of were developed in tandem, but we started another business called FamSpam, and it is basically the antithesis of GitHub, and by that I mean it was a product that we didn't really use, didn't really care about, unless you ask my mother, and it didn't make any money. So it was how best not to build business and take those lessons that we learned from FamSpam and apply them to GitHub. The one good thing from FamSpam, though, is that we were building GitHub as we were building FamSpam. And by that I mean the code that powered FamSpam was being hosted on GitHub. So we would learn as we were developing that code base what we needed to add to GitHub and improve it along the way. So in that regard, FamSpam wasn't a complete failure, but at the time it was a little bit pressing. Fortunately, that side project, the GitHub side project, it was basically just a few guys that wanted to build a better way to host code. And at the time, the only Git hosting platform was awful, to put it gently. And so we wanted a better way to host and collaborate on code, and specifically using the Git version control system. And so we just decided to build our own. And it was a weekend project. It got developed on weekends, and then got into a state where we wanted to share with our friends and say, hey, you know, if you're interested in this Git thing, we've got this place where you can host your open source code. And it slowly kind of snowballed. They told their friends, and so on and so forth. Until it got to a point where they had become comfortable enough with the product, we had integrated enough features where the most amazing day of our lives was somebody asked us how they could pay us money, which was the complete opposite of what FamSpam was. There was a lot of people that told us that they would be interested in paying for a product, but people from GitHub had their credit cards out, and they were dying to pay us money. So that was a crazy day when that first happened. So what we did was we took all of these open source tools that we were building for collaborating and making open source projects amazing. And turns out all of those tools work really well within a corporate setting as well. So we were giving back to the open source community, but we were giving back to the open source community, but we were also building these really great corporate code development tools. And so GitHub formally launched 3.5 years ago. Made money the first day. It was amazing. It was unbelievable. And from that point on, we just slowly kept bootstrapping the company. Every day we'd make a little bit more money. Started off very slow, but over time it started to gain that critical mass where we actually had enough money to pay ourselves. I mean, up until that point, we were still doing consulting on the side to live. But GitHub finally reached a point where we could pay ourselves salaries and focus on it full time. And then hired Scott, our first employee, to come in and take the company to the next level. And for a while, GitHub was really just 4 guys working out of coffee shops and never bothered with an office. We do a lot of our communication. All of our communication is done through websites. There's a 37 Signals application called Campfire. It's a chat application. So the cool thing is a lot of our team now is distributed around the world, and the tools that we learned how to communicate, even as 4 guys in a coffee shop, have worked fairly well on a worldwide distributed team. So just that whole culture of collaborating, it doesn't necessarily have to be in person, has grown with us as the company has grown. And so fast forward 3.5 years, and we're just over 50 people. Revenues are fantastic, and we're having just a blast running the company. Fortunately, we haven't had to take any venture capital, so we're in control of the business, so we can do crazy stuff. We can do whatever the hell it is we want to do, because we own it. And so that means making GitHub.com, our SaaS business, a better product, to make it better for open source. And now we have over 3 million open source projects on GitHub, and we have over 1 million users on GitHub, and tens of thousands of paying customers on GitHub.com. And so that's amazing. We can build those tools for open source because we're all open source guys. We all like sharing code. But again, those tools also work very, very well in a corporate environment. But as we had come to find out, one of the things with hosting code is that a lot of companies aren't comfortable giving their code to a third party. So we launched an on-premise version of GitHub where we bundled it all up and created a product called the GitHub Firewall install, where companies could run this installer and have their own GitHub set up internally. So that's another big product for us because we're so in love with our tools that we've made. We want everyone in the world to use it. In order to do that, we couldn't just have a SaaS product. We had to be able to let everyone use this. And in order to do that, we needed to have an on-premise version, even though it's a little bit less sexy than having a website. But it's also a great revenue source for us, so we're using that as a way to continue to grow and build the company. Future plans, boatload more features on GitHub.com, making it even easier for teams and maybe not so much technical people, but managers and other folks of that sort, that they can keep track of what the developers are doing and making sure that GitHub is the one-stop shop for anything code related, and making it easier to use Git, because we know that Git isn't always the easiest thing in the world to use. So we've done stuff like launch the GitHub for Mac application, where one of the biggest new customer points with that is designers. Designers don't always know the source control tools all that well, but if we give them an application that all, instead of having to type in the terminal, they just click the sync button, and it pushes their changes to GitHub. I mean, it's a way to expose what we do at GitHub to a much wider audience. So definitely doing more stuff like that, and it's a very exciting time for us. And we're just going to continue to build out the entire ecosystem around GitHub and get as many people as possible using it because we think our tools are the best. So to go more into depth about what those tools actually are, I'm going to let Scott take over.
Okay, before I get started, so I was just going to do an introduction to Git. How many of you use Git daily? Half? Everybody? Does anybody use something other than Git, or are you just not using version control? Oh, what do you guys use? Subversion. Subversion? Do you guys still do some Subversion stuff? TFS. I'm sorry. Anybody else? No. Subversion. Mercurial? There's a couple of Mercurial people? Cool. We should go have beers and talk about Mercurial versus Git at some point. It's one of my favorite things to talk about. So I'm going to do a lightning intro to Git and GitHub for those of you that are not familiar with Git and or GitHub, and then think about any questions that you'd like us to talk, or you'd like either of us to answer about the company or the culture or the tools or my personal life. I don't know what you guys are interested in, but you guys have pizza, so hopefully you won't fall asleep at some point here. So I just wanted to introduce myself real fast. My name is Scott. I work at GitHub. A couple things that I've done that you might be interested in are gitsem.com. So this is the official Git website. So I designed and maintain this site. So if there's anything horribly wrong or misleading about it, you have only me to blame. And if there's anything you'd like to see on it, please email me because I do still active in the site. I did another website called gitref.org, which is a Git reference. So if you're starting to use Git on the command line or you want to know what some of the terminology is, I've grouped the sort of verbs that you use into what you use them for, and then sort of a basic how to use them for the basics, the basic reference. Not every command line option you can possibly do, not the man pages, which are fairly verbose. There's a lot of stuff that you can do, but just sort of the how to do it in the simplest possible way. So a quick start if people are new to Git. I wrote a book that A-Press published called Pro Git. And they let me Creative Commons license the book, which if any of you are any of you guys authors? Has anybody written anything? If you do, and I encourage you to, if only so that you know how awful the process of writing a book is. Let them, or try to see if you can get your publisher to Creative Commons license your book, because it's really cool. You can go to progit.org, you can read this whole book online, you can download Mobi or EPUB or whatever you want to, and all of the content is free, yet the book still sells very, very well, right? And so it's really great. I'd love to see, I wish every technical book was Creative Commons licensed. And that goes along with what we're doing at GitHub. We want more stuff to be commodities, right? More software to be a commodity, so that everybody is not reinventing the wheel all the time. That's a big drive for us, is to make it so that you make money off of the stuff that there's specific business logic or something special that you've done, but anything that's generic or something, or you're trying to get recognition for yourself or your company or something, open source it so that other people can use it and people don't have to reinvent the wheel all the time. We try to make that as easy as possible. That's our main thing, is to try and make developers work their lives better in multiple ways, right? So open sourcing technical content is nice because more people have access to it. You still make money off of it, but more people have access to it, and there's not that barrier of entry, right? That's my Twitter if anybody's interested. And if you do have suggestions on any of these websites, feel free to email me. I'd be more than happy to help out. So that's me. So I want to do Git in 60 seconds. So for those of you who don't know what Git is, I'm going to super fast introduce Git. Git is an open source distributed version control system implemented as a directed acyclic graph of commit objects pointing to snapshots of content with all data saved in its own custom content addressable file system by the SHA-1 checksum hash of each object's data. Branches are simply pointers into this directed graph of commits identifying entry points that designate the latest work on that branch. This makes branching cheap and simple, and merging simply amazingly easy. And it encourages nonlinear development style with many branches, frequent reintegration, and frictionless context switching, while facilitating distributed development, cryptographic integrity, and late decision making. Nearly all commands run locally with no network latency overhead, and it is implemented mainly in C, which makes it very fast and efficient even for very large projects. So there are many large open source projects that are using Git today, not to mention the 900,000 unique open source projects on GitHub. and 2.1 or 3 million now. These numbers are a little bit behind. Or no, I'm sorry, 2 million public repositories. We host over 3.5 million repositories total, but a lot of those are private. There are 2.1 million public repositories and 1 million developers on GitHub alone, right? So a lot of people are using Git, and a lot of large projects are using Git. So if you are using version control, and by God you should really be using Git or Mercurial. You can use Mercurial as well, but really you should be using Git. Now, that's Git. So if you were not familiar with Git beforehand, now you know everything about Git. So GitHub. GitHub is a software as a service product. We also have an on-premise one, but software as a service is really nice. It makes it so you don't have to administer it. You don't have to worry about security stuff. You don't have to worry about uptime. You don't have to implement features. You don't have to we provide support, right? So as most of you know, I think a lot of you are working on SaaS products for government, and I mean, that's a lot of what this company does. So you understand the benefits of software as a service. But a lot of the stuff that we bring to it, instead of hosting your own Git stuff, or of any of that, is that we focus on simplicity, right? That's one of the key things, and I've seen this in your office when I was over there as well. Simplicity over features, right? Simplicity is key to getting people to be able to, you have to focus on what the user is trying to do and make it as simple as possible for them to do that. One of the things that the Git command line is really bad at is simplicity, right? And so we've gotten a lot, because the Git command line, Git itself is very technically capable, but the command line is incredibly complicated. And so a lot of people want to use it because they can see the benefits of it, but it's very difficult to learn and to use it as a high entry point. So we've tried to make this as simple as possible through everything that we can on the website to try and make things easier for people. It's free for open source software, so we have a lot of open source on it. Just as a business thing, one of the main reasons we do this, besides the fact that we're all open source programmers and we like this, is that it's really good advertising, right? Almost everybody that uses GitHub came to GitHub because of an open source project or wanted to put something on there, and then ended up paying for, to outsource their version control stuff. So if you're building a SaaS model, try to think of some way of offering some of it for free for open source stuff, because it works as a good driver for people, right? And the other nice thing about this is that it sort of pre-vets stuff, right? It's kind of an interesting business implication of having all this open source stuff on there, is that if you then decide to pay for hosting your private code in the same way, if you hire people from the community, now with GitHub, you have 1 million developers that are pre-trained in all aspects of the software. They don't have to come in and learn ClearCase or something. They've been doing open source development with this for a long time, so there's less of a learning curve. So it's a really nice side effect of that. There's a large community on GitHub, so again, there's 1 million developers. So if you want help with something, I highly encourage one of the things I talk about a lot, I'm not really doing it as much in this talk, but is open source development. I think open source is incredibly important. And there's a lot of benefits to you guys to do open source, so that people know who you are, and the business, the company itself gets out a little bit. But there's this huge community on GitHub of people that are working on a lot of the same problems that you are. So if you are reinventing some wheel because the other wheels sucked for some reason, put it on GitHub, open source it. If it is generic at all, if it is software that should be a commodity, right? If it is sort of fungible software, if it's software that should be able to be used at your organization and basically any other organization as well, there's not something specific to your product in it, then open source it, because that gives you lots of stuff, right? That gives you 1 million developers that could possibly need it as well, and fork it and fix it and push to it and give you more work back. So you get free work on your stuff. And since you know it's going to be public, sometimes you spend a little bit more time on it so that you don't look like an idiot and people see your source code and stuff. So there's a lot of benefits to open sourcing software. Again, we have a large community on GitHub. And that's the other thing is, if you see a wheel that you kind of want to reinvent because you don't think that a wheel exists, I may be taking this metaphor too far, but if there's a problem that you're trying to solve, you're like, I need a MongoDB driver in Ruby or something. You're like, I don't know if anything exists. I'm just going to start writing it. Go to GitHub, because there's so much code on there that's open source. You can just search. There's a search functionality. You can search for something that you want to do and see if it exists yet, right? Even if it's sort of crappy, instead of doing it yourself, fork that and make that project better, right? Contribute to the community. There are a lot of upsides to that. So there's a lot of companies using GitHub. I don't know if you guys are doing this. Do you guys have, does Sparc have open source projects on GitHub that you maintain? So a lot of companies are doing this, right? Twitter, Facebook, blah, blah, blah. They take open source stuff that they're working on, they put it on GitHub, and that is their sort of developer outreach program, right? To find people. It's also really useful for recruiting, and I don't know if you guys have as hard a time recruiting as a lot of tech companies do, but a really great way of finding really good people to work on your products is the open source stuff that has to do with your core competency. See who is passionate about committing to those projects and to improving those projects, and then hire them from wherever they're working, right? We do that a lot, we piss off a lot of companies that way, but it's a really good way of finding people that are passionate about whatever your core competency is. So it's good for recruiting as well. So I'll go over a couple of features of GitHub, mostly because a lot of people don't know about some of the stuff you can do. So if you're using GitHub, I kind of want you to be power users of it because it's really cool. You know, again, this is going back to sort of simplicity, to making things as easy as possible. This is a good example that I like. The sign up page has 4 fields on it, which are the only 4 fields that we need to do stuff, right? We don't have, if you used to do open source development before GitHub, like SourceForge or something, you'd see sign up pages with like 100,000 things on it. It's like, what default license do you want to use? You know, it has a whole bunch of information of what you need. Try to make it as simple as possible and then gather that information later, right? On any web app that you're doing. Make it as easy as possible for the user to do what they need to do. This is the page. This, again, is how we find a lot of the developers that we hire at GitHub, is we look at their GitHub profile and say, what are they doing? What are they passionate about? What is their activity? What do they like to do in their spare time, right? It's a good way of finding people. So, to create a new repository, again, we try and make it easy as possible. You click on New Repository, it's a little button. We give you the least amount of information. All you need to do to create a new repository in GitHub is to type in some project name that's unique to your namespace and hit Create Repository. The other 2 fields here are optional because a lot of people fill in. But it can literally take 20 seconds to create a repository. And if you think about how hard that can be and how hard that is on other sites, this is a really simple model. So again, you know, look at the products that you're making, try to make them as simple as possible for the user to do whatever they're doing, because it's been very successful for us that it reduces so much friction that was there before. I mean, one of the interesting things about GitHub, to me, looking back at it, is how crowded the space was before we got into it, right? I mean, if you think about, if we told people when we were starting, we're going to start a source code hosting service, they're like, you are insane. There are 100 of them out there. There's SourceForge, there's Google Code, there's a whole bunch of them, and we're like, yeah, but they're all shitty. And so, if you make something that's really good, that reduces friction even a little bit more, you can make money off of it, right? I mean, you're targeting developers. Developers have money. Just make their lives a little bit easier. That's all you have to do. So, anyways, you get a new repo. For those of you who don't know, how many of you use Eclipse? Do you guys use eGit or the Mylan GitHub connector? Do you guys use GitHub internally, like for development? I don't actually know. If you do and you use Eclipse, I would look at the eGit stuff if you're not using it, because it's come a long way. We have a full-time Eclipse developer on staff that's been working on the Mylan connector. So if you're not using the Mylan GitHub plugin, or you're not using Mylan, take a look at it because it's really cool. I'm not actually showing it here. I'm just showing the basic stuff that ships with eGit. But there's a Mylan connector where you can do like create gists and do pull requests and stuff all through Mylan, and it's really, really nice. So if you're using Eclipse and you're using GitHub, check out the GitHub Mylan connector because it's kind of awesome. But again, this is an example of not optimizing for simplicity, which is eGit, or basically anything that comes with Eclipse. But so instead of saying like git push origin master or something, this is how they've decided to simplify it. But there's not much we can do about that, right? I mean, this is just what Eclipse is. But it's a good counterpoint to not making things simple, to just saying what is every possible thing that they can want. Well, let's create a source ref from ref sets master to a destination ref set master, and then add that spec, right? That seems totally feasible. That seems like the easiest possible way to do this. So don't do that. But if you are using Eclipse, there are some nice tools for it, and we've sponsored a lot of that development, and we're trying to make this easier. But the point is that if you're using Eclipse, check out that. And then you do that, you get a nice page, right, with the URL. There's some other stuff as well. PJ was talking about the Mac app, right? So this is something that we're working on. And again, the idea is to make Git easier, right? The primary friction that we were trying to solve with GitHub is hosting it, is the website, because it was very difficult for us. Even though we were fairly good at command line, there was no good option for that was not hugely, that had a ton of friction in it, right? The whole process had a lot of friction to create a repository and to push it up somewhere. So we've tried to solve that as much as possible. And now, for a lot of people, the command line is the new friction, right? Is the point that Git is most difficult for them. So if you don't have complicated needs, this is what we're trying to do. We're working on a Windows client right now. We launched a Mac app because we use Mac and we're more familiar with it to try and work out what we wanted it to the workflow to be like. But this is a friction that we're trying to reduce, right? And we're not even charging for this. We just want it to make it easier for people to use Git. And then we figure some of those people will probably end up using GitHub at some point anyways, even though you don't need to. You can use this with anything, right? It's just a generic Git client. We did a code review. So this is one of the things. GitHub operates completely asynchronously. So we have an office. We have 50 employees. There's maybe 15 of them in the office at any given time. Everybody works wherever they want to, whenever they want to. That's been a tenet of GitHub since the early days. We don't want to, it doesn't matter days of the week, hours of the day, it makes no difference. Just get work done sometime during the month and we'll be happy. And so we try to make everything asynchronous, everything. So the chat room is a good example of that. We don't have an office. Our office is the chat application. So people can come in whenever they want to, ask a question, leave, come back, and read through the backlog and see if somebody answered it, right? We don't want to force people to be synchronously with other people at the same time. I know you guys operate differently, and most other places do as well. This is just a thing that we try to solve for ourselves because that's how we happen to work. But it's really nice, it's really easy to contribute to something, right? This is another friction, is contribute. Has anybody contributed to an open source project with Subversion? It's basically the worst process imaginable, right? It's actually not, I don't even know if it's any better than like patch and diff functionality on the Unix command line, right? It has really not improved at all since then. So, what you do is you do a diff, you take it, patch, and you email it to somebody, and they try and apply it, but upstream is moved, so it doesn't apply, so they email it back, and they go, can you pull from upstream, and then reapply the patch, or I'll try and do it, and it's all awful. So we try to make that process easy, because, again, reducing that friction makes it so that people will collaborate more. Patches that would not have been sent because it's too much of a pain in the ass, now it will be, right? There's some pain in the ass bar, that once you get below that bar, people will do something. And if the pain in the ass bar is too high, then they simply won't do it, right? It's not that they won't improve your software, it's that they won't send you the change, right? They won't give it back because it's too difficult. It's a pain. So we've tried to make that simple. So what you do, if you haven't done this, I encourage you to, this is your homework. You all have homework, it will be graded. I'm looking at all of you. So what you do is go to an open source project and improve it somehow, right? Just send a patch, just contribute to the community, right? So the way you do it on GitHub is you click fork, and what it does is it takes their code and it gives it you the same code, but in your namespace, right? So you can push it, you can modify it. It doesn't really matter. It's visible, but you don't have to have write access to their repository, right? So you fork it, you get your own copy of it. You can do whatever you want. And this is similar to like what SVN did. It's just the fork was on your hard drive, right? You would have your own copy of a project. You could edit it however you wanted to. But the point is we want to try and make it easier to contribute. So what you do is you edit something. We have like a little edit in the browser thing if you want to do it simply. Improve some README or some documentation. I encourage you all to do this. It is homework. Make something better. And then once that's done, you click on this pull request button. And what it does is it calculates what the difference is. And you say, here's something that made it better. And you hit send pull request. And it immediately emails that guy and said, here's where that change is. Here's where the commit is. They can merge it in. They can even merge it on the website now. There's like a merge button. But they can click on what are the commits that they did, what are the files changed, get a unified diff of everything. It's very easy, right? And you don't have to extract it from your email and look at it and do all that crap. It's very difficult to do that. We try to make that as easy as possible. So you get the author, the maintainer of the project gets an email that says, here's the files that were changed, the commit summary and all this stuff. Here's patches and diffs and stuff if you actually want to like apply it with, GNU apply or something, but why would you do that? You can see a list of all the stuff that's open that people have sent you, and you get this nice view where you can come in and say, I like the idea, but I don't really like the implementation, maybe you should do it this way. And then they can decide whether they want to spend time to fix it or not, right? You can have a whole, this is what email used to do for open source projects, right? The sort of email thread. You can say, here's the conversation about this code, where I want it to go, and if I'll accept it or not. And you can even go in and comment on individual lines of code, right? Maybe this should be something different, blah, 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 and you can have a conversation with the author about this. Again, this is something that used to happen in email, or still happens in email in a lot of projects. Try to make it simple, try to make it easy to do, because it's a good idea, right? It's good to talk about code, it's good to talk about changes, but it's just sort of difficult to do it. So in the end, I don't have a thing. It's actually kind of cool. There's a merge button. If the merge will apply cleanly, we actually have a button to just click on it and merge it on the server instead of actually having to do it on the command line. So technically, you could do this whole workflow in a browser entirely, right? You don't even need to use Git on the command line at all. It's a very simple change. So reducing frictions, right? That's what this is all about. So there's also some nice stuff that you can do with Git that's actually a little bit complicated. If anybody's done like Git log and then one branch and then like ... another branch. I don't know if anybody's ever run that command, a branch comparison. But you can do that on the command line very easily. You can see all the branches that you have in a project and click on compare, and it'll just give you the diff between that branch and another. And it'll show you how many commits are on one branch that are not on your base branch, ahead and behind. So how many are on there and how many commits is it behind the master branch and so on and so forth. So you can do this very easily through this rather than having to do it on the command line, which is a very powerful feature of the command line, but again, we're trying to make it easy, right? So you get something that looks like this. Here's all the commits that are on that branch that are in the master branch right now. Here's all the files that were changed in unified diff. So you can see, if I merge it in, this is what's going to happen, right? Issues, so again, we have like an issue tracker thing. And if any of you have used Jira, this is the anti-Jira, right? This is the opposite of Jira. Where Jira is, let's look at every feature that any company could ever possibly need that we could charge money for and integrate all of them into our product. And you get a very complicated user interface and process. But you can solve basically any possible workflow. With it, we're much more simple, right? This is all you get. You can do an assignee and a milestone, and that's it. Title, have some comments on it. There's nothing else, right? And so it doesn't work for every company, but it works for 80% of the companies or so. And so this is another example of simplifying a product as much as possible, right? Taking out everything that is not completely necessary and launching that. And it works for a lot of companies, right? And if they need something else, then they can go to Jira or something, but most of them don't. And so we don't want to over-engineer the problem. We want to make it simple for most of people's needs, right? Simple milestones, things like that. We also have an iPhone app that people have been working on for the process of, you're getting on a train, you're going to work, I want to see what my to-do list is today, right? What are the issues that have been open overnight, that sort of thing. You don't need a whole web interface for that. You can just look at it on your phone, create some stuff, do some comments and stuff, and then you get into work and you're ready to go. You have context. Some other stuff that people may not have been using, wikis, so we have like a simple wiki system. And the cool part about the wiki system, I mean, it's sort of a general, wiki system. It's not that much better, but one of the cool things is that we have Git access. So you can clone any of the wikis on GitHub, edit them locally, and then push, and it applies all those changes onto the wiki, right? So instead of having to do everything through the web browser, you can actually clone it down, do whatever you want on the command line, and then do a push, and that's like updating 5 pages at one time, which is kind of a cool thing, to have Git-backed systems. Pages is another thing that's used, I don't think used enough on GitHub, but a lot of people take advantage of it. It's very cool. It's static hosting that we do for projects. So if you push to a branch, some static HTML into a branch that is specially named, we'll host it for you. So some examples, I know you guys use Bootstrap on a couple projects, right? The database stuff. So Bootstrap, if you go to the Bootstrap homepage, is actually hosted on Twitter, on GitHub Pages. So Twitter doesn't host this themselves. They generate the documentation, they push it to a branch at GitHub, and we host it for them, right? So they don't have to fire up an instance or put on Heroku or trying to figure out some way of doing hosting. Anything that's static, just static HTML. So this is very common to like generate documentation for your project in an automated fashion and just push it to a branch and we'll host it for you, right? It's very nice. So I think most people don't know that you can do this, and it's pretty nice. Bundler, if anybody uses Ruby, this is all on GitHub, and they even have like their own domain name. It doesn't have to be project.github.com. You can put in a CNAME file and we'll host it under that CNAME that you have set up, right? And again, this is sort of the last thing, is search. If you're looking for a project, do not reinvent it if possible, right? Look to see if it exists, and then try and improve that project rather than just writing it from scratch, unless there's a really good reason to. Try to make the community better and try and make software commodities, right? It's better for the entire software ecosystem. So, for example, MongoDB driver in PHP, there's 100 of them. You can go through this and find stuff. I do this all the time. Find stuff that I did not know because they don't advertise them very well. But there's code to do that. I found Python code. Do you guys know what a quadcopter is? Those little. There's Python code to run that if you want to. And all you have to do is search for like AR drone on GitHub and then filter it by the language you want to be able to control it by. And there are a bunch of projects for doing that. You can do it. You can control one in Node if you wanted to. I see people down there about to waste time on that over the next couple months. It's great. I love it. But yeah, there's tons of stuff. I found so much stuff on GitHub that you don't know exists. So if you want to play on something, look to see if it exists first before you write it yourself. Okay, so that's it. So thank you very much, and we can do questions or something if you'd like. Does anybody have any questions on anything? Yeah.
So, a couple things. First, thank you guys. Thank you for coming.
Yeah.
This was great. And thank you for GitHub. I think, for me, it's changed the way that people write code and share code and collaborate on code in huge ways. It's just so much more accessible than it was. You know, the other day, I saw a Ruby gem that I wanted to make a patch to. Then we just said, forked it, wrote some code for an hour in Ruby, did a pull request, he accepted it, and there's value to it. So it's huge. It's scaled huge more than that. I have one little question for you. So a lot of times, if I'm on GitHub and I want to do a code search, which is great too, by the way, I'll search for like a function name, like in a library or something, and it'll show like every fork of that project over and over. I would like it if there was like a check mark in there where it could be like deduplicated or something.
Yeah, we need to vastly improve search. The only thing I actually use it for is looking for projects because it's still fairly good at that. But a lot of the algorithms for looking through the description of the stuff are not as good as I would like them to be. For the code search, it gives you way too much and it'll give you it's not great. So we're working on moving that to Elasticsearch, which is right now it's on Lucene, like a Lucene Solar. It's on Solar right now, and so we tried to move it. We basically had it 90% implemented to move all of the search stuff over to. Do you remember that company, that Index Tank, that just got bought by LinkedIn and shut it down? Like we were so close to it being done, and then they got acquired and shut down. And so we're like, So now we have to switch everything over to Elasticsearch and host it ourselves. So yeah, we're working on improving that because especially as we get up into like the 3-4 million repositories and stuff, there's so much stuff there that filtering it down becomes more and more important. I agree. It'll happen. We'll work on it. Yeah.
Did you guys see, you mentioned like the firewall version that was internal. I assume that was like big enterprise type companies that don't want to give up code.
Yeah.
But was that driven by kind of like an industry move towards Git to support some of the distributed development and stuff, or was it driven like from engineers who have been using GitHub like tool?
You're like the sales of enterprise or
Yeah,
the FI tool?
yeah. Where was that interesting?
Yeah. So the on-premise install version is almost entirely sold by developers pushing it into their organizations because they use GitHub.com and they're like, I want this to be my development environment in the office, right? And they go, well, we can't put stuff on GitHub.com because it's in the cloud. And the cloud is evil. We want it inside our firewall, and so we did it specifically because we were getting a lot of pushback, especially like in the Java community. They're like, I'm not going to put stuff on GitHub.com, even though they're using like Heroku to deploy stuff. So their code is in the cloud. I don't understand why that's a problem, but it doesn't really matter. Or sometimes there's government regulations on where you can have your source code and stuff. So, but yeah, in sales-wise, we almost never like talk to CIOs and be like, this is why this is good for your development team. It's always the developers like pushing it into their organizations and selling it for us. Yeah, I mean, it's a good sales model, except that in that we've done no selling at all. Yeah, I'll listen to your list. It's a good sales model that we haven't really, we have a salesperson now, but we didn't for like the first year of the product. We would just get, cold leads, like, or people, or I don't know, not cold. We would get people calling us and saying, how can we pay you for this? And we were like too slow in responding to half of them. So, which is nice that we don't have to go and like sell into a company or something. But it also means that we're not doing a very good job of making money. Because a lot of times those developers can't get it sold to their organizations very easily. And we have to wait for them to get all the way to the point where they're contacting us, which is not really optimal. Yeah.
whose cloud is backing you guys, and how'd you come up with that decision?
We're on Rackspace. We're on bare metal. We're actually not in the cloud. We ourselves are a cloud, sort of, because you outsource services to us, but we actually run off of Rackspace because we were on a different hosting provider. But the I/O requirements of Git itself are incredibly high, and virtualizing that disk was even like a loss of 15-20% or whatever was way too high. So we mainly it is disk based that we don't put on like AWS or something like that. It has never really been an option just because of the characteristics of Git itself. But yeah, so we're on bare metal at Rackspace. Mostly, I mean, some of the stuff like the pages, some of it is virtualized in Rackspace. We have some Rackspace cloud stuff, especially we have a lot of Heroku stuff for internal apps, and Rackspace cloud for internal apps, and like pages building, and we have some Zen virtualization as well for taking some, like getting more machines out of one or something like that. But all of the GitHub.com, the front ends and the servers, the disk servers are all there. Yeah.
What do you guys think about like the Apache Foundation? There was like a Hacker News thread about this.
Don't ask him about it.
Well, I think it was an interesting point that you mentioned like SourceForge and stuff, but those are competitors, right? Because they're like for-profit companies. But Apache Foundation, when people are moving stuff from Git or one way or the other, I don't know. Just sort of general.
I mean, I would never put an open source project there, but some companies like eGit is under Apache, and I was actually really glad that eGit is under Eclipse Foundation. But I mean, foundations in general can be good. There are legal, ramifications for patent. I honestly don't, because none of the stuff that I've ever done doesn't keep that worried about that. But as far as like something getting a legitimate hat and stuff, people like to see a foundation there, and they have a lot of process and stuff, which is what I hate about it. But some people find that useful. It's so awful. I mean, so like eGit is under the Eclipse Foundation. So one good part of that is that it forced eGit to be under a sane license. So it's not GPL like Git is, which means that businesses can do more with it. It is open source, but it's under the Eclipse open source license rather than GPL. And so it was this big movement to get all this code moved over to this other license, and that has been hugely helpful for Git adoption. And I'm not sure that would have happened without trying to get it under the foundation, right? So it's useful in those aspects, but on the other side, getting any change into eGit is almost impossible. It's such a huge pain in the ass. We have a full-time developer where half of his patches are just sitting in the mailing list, and because he doesn't have commit rights yet, hopefully he will soon, but and he has to, just the whole process around it is the slowest possible process that you can imagine, basically. If you sat down and went, what is the worst software development process that we could have? You would do what the eGit Garrett submission process is. So yeah, I don't know. It's good and bad. It depends. Okay. Yeah.
So I have two questions and one simple. One, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the emergence of the Ruby community around the same time as Git. It seems like the Ruby community and the GitHub community have kind of developed in parallel with each other in a lot of ways. I'm curious to get your insider's perspective on that.
Yeah, well, I think the Ruby community was starting to come up a couple years before GitHub or Git and GitHub. Git and GitHub sort of came up at the same time, I think. But I believe that they both sort of benefited from a group of developers that just hated their jobs, right? And so they didn't like the tools they were using, everything. They didn't want to put up with unnecessary frictions in their development process. And so Ruby came in as a way of, look at how cool it can be to code. Like you can basically write in pseudocode and it runs. And it's really not, it's a nice environment to work in. It's just very nice to, I love writing Ruby. There's nothing that I type that I don't need to type. And I like that. And so a lot of developers that were like, I mean, screw Java, I just enjoy doing this more. That same group saw Git and was like, screw Subversion, look at how nicely I can work on different lines of code. Branching and merging is so easy. It makes everything so easy. Even though the UI kind of sucks on it, it reduces so many frictions in my development process. Instead of having to do like feature flagging and code and dumb crap that you have to do when you're using Subversion because you can really only be working on one line at a time. They're like, I can just create branches for everything and do it that way. So I think it hit the same mindset of developer where all they had to do was get demoed on it, and they're like, well, that's 100 times better than what I'm doing. So they will go through the painful process of switching over and learning something new. And so I think Ruby and Git sort of came in relative, they hit the same mindset of developer, where they're fine taking some pain to switch over to something if that end product is so much more, it's so much nicer than that, right? So yeah, and we definitely rode the Ruby wave too. I mean, Ruby on Rails came over to GitHub early, and so a lot of that made people look at GitHub as a solution for doing open source stuff, and that drove our development along in the early days. Nowadays, I think JavaScript is actually larger project, or more projects on GitHub are other languages than Ruby now. And certainly most of our growth are coming from that. Now we're even getting, the eGit stuff is coming in, so we get a lot of Java coming in. .NET, we have a ton of .NET stuff, which is really weird to us because none of us program on Windows. We've never done any evangelization in the Windows stuff. The tooling for Git on Windows is much worse than on Mac, and it's better than it used to be, but it's worse than on Mac and Linux. But TFS sucks so badly that people are like, I don't even care if I have to learn command line and do stuff. If it's better than TFS, I will use anything on the planet. So we're getting a lot of stuff from that. And there's a lot of alt.NET stuff that is driving, like NuGet and things like that are driving open source projects in .NET. So we're seeing a lot of that as well. So yeah, I mean that was before, but now even people that don't even really care what they're doing will move to GitHub just to get the social aspects of it. Yeah.
Another question. You talked about reinventing the wheel a little bit, and I've wondered if there's ever been a relationship between you guys and ENTP, because Lighthouse has always been one of the main providers of issue tracking.
I think we employ all of ENTP now, don't we? We've stolen everybody from ENTP.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Rick Olson and Kyle Neath were both major developers there, developer designer, and they were like hire 5 and 7 for us or something like that. So we basically took the Lighthouse team and hired them away from ENTP, and I think we've even gotten a couple of them.
So the plan is kind of eventually to move into the issue tracking space pretty substantially with maybe a license project or something?
I don't know. I mean, it's possible that we'll continue iterating on our issue tracking system. We did a big refresh to include milestones and assignees, which we didn't even have. The first version was title and body, and that's it. That is it, right? And labels. It's more like Gmail. Like manage your issues like Gmail, which is something that worked fairly well for us and works for a lot of people. And we got enough pushback on those two, on assignees and milestones, that we redid that to add that. But that's how much we don't want to add features to stuff, right? We want to keep it as simple as possible. So there are improvements we'd like to make to it, but I don't think we'll never be like a Jira competitor where we're actively trying to steal people from Jira. We would rather make a super simple product that works well for issue tracking, and then try and convince people that this is a better way of doing issue tracking. Right? So it's not that there aren't improvements to make, but the simplicity is really key. And so, like when you talk about developing the product or something, it's basically just how can we make it simpler than it is now. Does that answer your question? Yeah.
What was the biggest challenge with GitHub, like in ever? What was the biggest challenge?
The biggest challenge. I don't know. We had a hard time with hosting originally. We were starting to fall over for a long time before we moved over to bare metal and started hosting our own stuff. I mean, from the early days, since we were bootstrapped, we've always tried to outsource as much as possible. So we outsourced our sysadmin teams. It was only until this year that we actually hired a full-time sysadmin. We had a company that did that for us, a company that did legal, a company that did HR. Like we tried to outsource everything. Like software is like everything is a service, right? We would only do coding, so we were just coders and designers for a long time.
So you outsourced your system engineer. That seems. How did that work for you? That's difficult.
Well, we had a relationship with a company, and so we would work with them to define practices, and then eventually we hired one of those guys out of that company.
That's the trend.
Which they were also very mad at us about. We have a lot of companies mad at us for stealing it. They're good people, but yeah. So moving off of that infrastructure is one of the hugest things, right? It is because it's so hard to do that. And then I don't know what else. The FI stuff has been a really big challenge because none of us know anything about enterprise. We're all startup and simple and stuff, and you go into enterprise and they're like, here's a list of 400 features in a spreadsheet.
Right.
These other companies have filled in what they've done. What can you do? And I'm just like, I don't even want to have this conversation.
You know, the firewall install product, which has been renamed to GitHub Enterprise, by the way. The firewall install is a terrible name. I had a guy recently, before we changed the name, ask me why our firewall product was better than like a Cisco firewall. This is exactly why we're changing the name. So what I would say, that we had a serious wake-up call. You asked a question about Ruby and how we kind of grew up together. And the first time we went to a PHP conference, PHP, well, basically any language other than Ruby and JavaScript in our early days wasn't very active on GitHub. So we went to a PHP conference just to talk to PHP developers and had a booth there. And we were talking to them about GitHub, and they had no idea who we were, which was very disconcerting because we were so immersed in the Ruby community and everybody loves us, and you know, they think we walk on water, and it's like, well, I don't know who you are, so I don't care about you. So that was humbling, to say the least. But the other part about that particular conference was we'd give them the pitch on GitHub, and they'd say, hey, that's amazing, how do I use it? And then we'd say, well, you go to the website, and they said, no way. I can't possibly use your website. I need to have this technology within our firewall. So, you know, having spoken, again, since the Ruby community is generally people, that, even within larger corporations, working on new stuff, they're able to take risks on newer technologies. And you talk to Java guys or PHP guys or whoever, they can't take a risk on newer things necessarily. They have, you know, processes set in place that they can't deviate from all the time. And for us, just being exposed to that type of mentality was a huge wake-up call. It's, wait a minute, we're not the most amazing company in the world. These guys have serious issues with the way we do business, and how do we, everyone uses pivot nowadays, but I hate that word. We had to take a step back and realize that we weren't a one-size-fits-all solution. We had to be able to react to that. So yeah, that was a challenge for us.
A similar question. If we had to do it all again, what would be different? Both of them.
I'd probably take VC.
You would?
Yeah. I know that's a horrible thing to say, but I was broke. And that was not fun. You know, I shouldn't say that. If I build another company, I'll take VC. I'm very happy that GitHub didn't take any money. I love the fact that we own 100% of the company. But there is just a ridiculous amount of stress doing it on your own. It was stressful. You know, back when we need to go into this, but it's interesting. Part of the way we bootstrapped GitHub was we got to the point where we wanted to hire Scott. We had some money saved up, and we were like, okay, we have to actually pay him money. It's not just the three founders anymore. We can expect to go broke, basically. But at that point, we were broke, and so we had to pay Scott, and we needed to pay ourselves. So what we ended up doing was a staggered payout schedule where we just decided, okay, we'll pay ourselves $3,000 this month, $4,000 next month, $5,000 the next month, until we hit a salary that we were all comfortable with. And then we would slowly build our way up that tree as the revenues continue to grow. And if we had a slower revenue month, we would just stay flat for that particular month. So, you know, it took about 6 or 7 months to actually get us to the salary position we needed to be in. You know, my thanks to Scott for taking a chance on the company that wanted to pay him a hell of a lot less than he was making in another company. But we made it work. And I shouldn't say that if I were to do it again, I'd take VC. The next company, I'll take VC, because that was, at the time, very painful.
I was curious if you all had any ideas of like continuous integration of Russian services.
Continuous integration regression. So pretty much any add-on services that are not our core. So it's very difficult. We did a Ruby Gem service early on, and it was a failure because we didn't want to keep it up. We didn't want to put resources into it, and it only targeted 30% of our users, or so. And so anything that is specific like that, where only some small percentage of our users, 10%, for a CI system, it has to generally target a specific language or a specific platform, and so it's not something that we'll probably do. What we'd like to do for that is to have, we've spent a ton of time on our API so that you can do almost anything through the API you can do through the website. And we're trying to add in more hooks so that right now if you commit any push that GitHub receives, you can put in a URL that will ping with data, and then that URL can do whatever it wants to. So what we would prefer, there are CI systems that are integrated in that they have hooks that we will tell when a push comes through or something. We do automated CI through that. We ping our Hudson server automatically every time somebody pushes to GitHub. We run it, then it reports back into Campfire for us. So pretty much anything like that that is specific, we would rather be a platform for that and provide APIs and data access and whatever you need, whatever tools you need to build the service yourself so you can make money off of that, offering that to a small subset of our users. So almost everything like that has come up that is generic, that is not targeting 100% of our audience, basically. That's why issues are simple. You can use another issue tracker if you want through, it works with FogBugs, it works with, through this API and hook system. So we would rather other companies make money and focus on that and give that audience the attention that they deserve. So that's how we haven't been approaching that, is by making the API better and making the hook system better. Yeah?
Have you guys evaluated software as a service marketplaces, like the Google Apps Marketplace, and are those as viable places for integration with GitHub for companies that say run Google Apps like we do?
No.
Like Jira's in there.
Yeah, I'd have to look at. I'd have to see what sort of value that adds on, in addition to just signing up on our website and using our hook system to do stuff. Like embedding it in other stuff is sort of difficult to do because we ourselves are more of a platform. Like we have a tab system and stuff. If anything, we've been trying to figure out a good way to do the other way around, where we can have a marketplace and people can write add-ons that come into our Chrome, but again, it doesn't always work out very well. It's sort of kludgy and stuff. We want to have a nice, simple user interface, consistent across everybody. So we turn away way more ideas than we embrace because we're not trying to get, this sort of, we're not interested in the App Store market, really. If other people want to write stuff that integrates in that and sell it themselves, then we would love to encourage them to do that. But we want to keep our product clean and simple as much as possible. So not doing that is generally worth more to us than trying to get whatever the user base is. Yeah.
So I saw the beer on the front screen when you first started. And
yeah. Are we in the talking about beer phase?
Well, maybe, I don't know. So I guess I was wondering, I know we have big teams here and we have a pretty strong culture here, but how do you maintain that across the chat screen, or what are some fun nuggets that
So we have a Campfire robot called Qbot. That is, I don't know if anybody's seen it. We open sourced it a while ago, but it's extensible. And this one of the first things that employees tend to do is add functionality to Qbot when they join the company, so that they can, they can ship stuff the first day. We don't really say ship something the first day, but most people will add something to Qbot the first day because they think it's funny or it's cool or it's a good way to get started in the culture, and it's generally amusing, right? It's generally something that is fun and funny to do. And so that's, Qbot is a good way of getting people on board, getting people into the culture in the chat room. There is culture in the chat room, right? Largely because of that. But in the office, we have maybe 75% of our employees live in San Francisco. They just don't always use the office. The office is more like, for us, is more like a huge coffee house with free beer and coffee and everything, right? And so you come in if you want a quiet place to work, we have like music playing, but if you want a place to sit down and concentrate that is better than your house or better than a coffee shop, but we don't make you do it, right? We make you be in the Campfire chat room so that people can communicate with you. Does that mean we're almost done? There was this, and I didn't know. Oh, one more question. Okay. But yeah, so stuff like the kegerator, the OctoCat kegerator, and we have video games, and we have fun sort of themed rooms, and we try to have a fun environment to be in, so that people will come in and meet with other people and talk. We like to encourage talking over beers rather than talking over code, because we like people to do more strategic stuff when they're talking in person rather than like anything tactical. We would rather have a pull request, right? Even if it's not finished, just like here's some code that has as an idea. What do you think about that? And all the chat can be done asynchronously. People that are not in the office are not left out. Gives us freedom to hire anywhere in the world we want to. So it's very nice. But in person, we want people to drink and to talk and to get excited about ideas, and then go home later and sober up and code.
Well, I do think that part of that, though, and Scott touched on that earlier, is because we have all of this open source code on GitHub, and we can find these people that we know are incredibly competent and great programmers. Largely, our interview process is just to make sure that there's a culture fit within GitHub. So our interview is a personality test, basically, and that generally happens over years. So that's one of the great things about GitHub. Just being able to, you already know that they're good programmers. It's just whether or not they're the right fit for the company.
Was there one more question? Yeah.
What project do you most proud of?
What project in my
Which do you look at and say, this is the one that makes it good?
The pull request system. The pull request system is, I think, a game changer for it. It has completely driven the way that we work. We develop it because of the way that we work, and it has improved that process. And it's allowed us to do a lot of stuff because of the asynchronous nature of it, and making stuff so much clearer than the sort of email process that came before that. I think it's changing the way a lot of people work, and a lot of open source has become way better because of it. But even internally, it has changed the way that we work. So that, and there aren't really other comparable code review systems. Like basically every code review system I've ever seen, when I've ever used anything, has completely sucked. And I love everything about pull requests. It's by far, I think, the best feature of the time.
You're talking about repositories?
Yeah.
I was just going to say the Ruby on Rails project, because they really catapulted us, at least within the Ruby community. We had been in a private beta for maybe 6 months or so, and they moved to GitHub the day we launched, and it was like complete validation for what we had been building. So it was amazing. So yeah, I'm very happy that they decided to move over.
Awesome. Thank you. Oh, yeah.
Where are y'all going for beer?
I heard you guys had a kegerator here. I don't know. Should we all just move?
You guys didn't want to work anymore, right? I'm getting daggers.
What's up? It's up to yeah, anywhere. Let's. Are we allowed to buy you guys beer? Is that? Yeah. Okay. when we went to Spaywar, we were like, beer's on us, and everybody's like, we can't accept that because they were all together.
There's a new shop on Mars. They have about 150 6 on hand.
Let's do it. All right. So what time? What time?
No, we have dinner. Yeah, anytime you want.
We'll figure something out. Send out an email. Like, we should buy you at least one beer.
Follow Sparc on Facebook.